Silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's a state of being, a canvas upon which the world paints its subtle sounds. Our brains, honed by millennia of survival, are wired not just to hear, but to listen within that silence. We are natural pattern seekers, constantly scanning the auditory landscape for anything that deviates from the norm, anything that feels out of place. It's a primal instinct, a deep-seated awareness that true danger often announces itself not with a roar, but with a whisper. It's in the profound quiet that we learn to truly listen, to parse the symphony of the natural world and detect the smallest break in its rhythm. We become attuned to the subtle language of our environment, where every sound has a meaning and every silence holds a story. The crunch of a footstep that doesn't belong, a sound that cuts through the ambient noise with alarming clarity. The sharp snap of a twig out of rhythm with the gentle sigh of the wind, a tiny acoustic event that can signal a massive shift in our sense of security. For as long as people have needed to protect something, a home, a camp, a border, we've relied on our ears just as much as our eyes. Hearing has always been our first line of defense, a vigilant, omnidirectional sentinel that never sleeps. It's the sense that guards our perimeter when sight is limited by darkness or distance. But what happens when you need to hear farther? When the threat lies beyond the horizon, past the natural reach of the human ear? Or what if you need to hear what's deliberately being hidden? To decipher whispers carried on the wind, or conversations muffled by walls and distance, intended for ears other than your own. This is where human ingenuity meets the fundamental physics of waves. It's the point where our innate survival instincts merge with our intellectual curiosity, driving us to overcome our biological limitations. We began to understand that sound is not magic, it is energy, traveling through a medium, governed by laws we could learn to manipulate. This is a history not of weapons, but of perception. A story of how we learned to cup the ear of an entire continent, to listen across oceans, and even to eavesdrop on the whispers of the cosmos. It's a chronicle of innovation born from the need to know what lies beyond the veil of silence. It is a quest to extend our senses beyond their natural limits, using the principles of sound and electromagnetism. From the simple acoustic horn to the complex algorithms of modern signal processing, we have relentlessly pursued the ability to hear the unheard, to make the invisible audible. This journey has reshaped warfare, intelligence, and our very understanding of the world around us. In the relentless quest for battlefield intelligence, sometimes the most effective tools are not the most complex. Before the age of satellite surveillance and digital eavesdropping, victory or defeat could hinge on something as fundamental as sound. Let's start with the most direct method of harnessing it: the listening post. This wasn't just about having good hearing, it was about understanding the very nature of how sound travels, and turning the battlefield itself into a massive sensory organ. This is an ancient military practice, but it was refined to a science in the trench warfare of World War I and the static defenses of World War II. In the stagnant, muddy landscapes of the Western Front, where armies were dug in for years, any sign of enemy activity was a matter of life and death. The constant threat of surprise infantry assaults, artillery repositioning, or, most terrifyingly, enemy sappers tunneling under your position to plant explosives made auditory intelligence absolutely critical. The listening post became the first line of defense against the unseen. In the dead of night, in the desolate, crater-pocked expanse of no man's land, soldiers known as listeners would be posted in forward holes or advanced bunkers. These positions were often just shallow scrapes in the earth, perilously close to enemy lines, offering minimal protection. The men chosen for this duty needed nerves of steel, immense patience, and an acute sense of hearing. They had to remain perfectly still for hours on end, isolated and exposed, straining to decipher the symphony of the front. Their entire job was to listen, not just for the obvious crash of artillery or the rattle of machine gun fire, but for the subtle, telltale signs of impending action. The faint clink of a shovel, the muffled cough of a soldier, the rustle of equipment being moved into position. These were the whispers that preceded the storm. But they weren't just using their ears passively, they were applying physics. They understood that sound is simply a vibration, a mechanical wave that needs a medium to travel through. And crucially, they knew that not all mediums are created equal. They knew that sound travels differently through various mediums. The air, especially on a battlefield filled with wind, rain, and the cacophony of distant battle, is a poor and unreliable conductor. It dissipates sound energy quickly and is prone to distortion. The ground, however, is a different story. It travels faster and farther through solid ground than through air, a principle called seismic conduction. The tightly packed molecules in soil and rock transmit vibrational energy far more efficiently. A sound that would be completely lost in the air after a few dozen yards could travel for hundreds through the earth. This was the key insight that listeners exploited. By pressing an ear to a stick driven into the earth, or using a medical stethoscope against a trench wall, a listener could detect the vibrations of digging, marching, or even conversations from hundreds of yards away, sounds completely inaudible through the air. The stick or stethoscope acted as a waveguide, concentrating the vibrations from a larger area and channeling them directly to the listener's ear, bypassing the noisy, inefficient medium of the air. They were turning the earth itself into a giant microphone diaphragm, using material density to their advantage. This simple, brilliant application of physics provided a crucial early warning system. It allowed them to map enemy tunnel networks, anticipate troop movements, and provide the seconds of warning needed to prepare for an attack, saving countless lives through the simple act of listening to the ground beneath their feet. This fundamental understanding of sound propagation, so critical in the theater of war, wasn't confined to the battlefield. It bled into civilian life, often evolving in parallel through necessity and ingenuity. In environments where formal security was non-existent and personal safety was paramount, the principles of acoustic surveillance were rediscovered and refined. People learned to listen to their surroundings not just for what was there, but for what was out of place. This deep, intuitive listening became a crucial survival skill, a way of reading the subtle language of the landscape to detect threats long before they became visible. The rustle of leaves, the call of a bird, or the sudden absence of sound, all became data points in a constant subconscious threat analysis. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the secluded hills and hollows of Appalachia, the clandestine home of the moonshiner. For these distillers, operating outside the law, their very freedom and livelihood depended on remaining invisible and unheard. Silence was a currency, and secrecy was the bedrock of their trade. Every step they took, every piece of equipment they used, was measured against the risk of discovery by federal revenue agents, or revenuers, who were constantly hunting for the telltale signs of an illegal still. The slightest, unnatural noise could travel for miles in the quiet mountain air, acting as a beacon for unwanted attention. But total silence is also suspicious. Nature is never truly quiet. A forest has its own rhythm, a constant hum of life, the drone of insects, the rustle of wind through the leaves, the distant calls of animals. An area of complete, dead silence is an anomaly. It suggests that something has disturbed the natural order, causing the local wildlife to fall quiet and hide. For a seasoned woodsman or a wary revenuer, this unnatural quiet is a significant red flag, an indicator that something is amiss, a sign that someone might be trying too hard to be hidden. So, the most successful moonshiners became masters of acoustic camouflage. They learned to control the acoustic profile of their environment, not by eliminating sound, but by curating it. The goal was a delicate twofold strategy. First, they had to make the unavoidable sounds of their operation, the hiss of the condenser, the gurgle of the mash, the clinking of jars, disappear into the existing soundscape. Second, and more cleverly, they had to manipulate that same soundscape so that any foreign noise, any sound made by an intruder, would be amplified and stand out in sharp relief. Their greatest ally in this endeavor was often a simple, natural feature, a rushing creek or a small waterfall. They would deliberately site their stills near these sources of constant natural sound. The broad-spectrum white noise generated by the moving water was perfect for masking the specific mid-range frequencies of a working still. The steady roar of the creek would swallow the bubbling and clanking, rendering their operation acoustically invisible to anyone not standing directly beside it. It was the perfect cover, a sonic blanket provided by the landscape itself. But more importantly, the creek created a consistent acoustic baseline. Think of it as a constant, predictable hum. The human ear is incredibly adept at noticing changes and deviations from a pattern. Once your brain tunes into the steady roar of the water, it effectively filters it out, treating it as the new silence. Your auditory focus shifts, waiting for any sound that breaks that established pattern. The creek wasn't just a mask, it was a canvas. Anyone attempting to approach the still, no matter how stealthily, would inevitably disturb this carefully calibrated environment. They would have to cross the water, creating a splash with a distinct acoustic signature different from the steady flow. Or they might snap a twig on the bank, a sharp, high-frequency crack that would cut through the low rumble of the water like a gunshot. Even the sound of dislodged pebbles tumbling into the stream would be a clear, unambiguous signal. This was a brilliant, low-tech form of acoustic tripwiring. The moonshiners had turned the entire surrounding area into a massive, passive sensor. They didn't need electronics or guards posted in the trees. They used their deep knowledge of the environment and the physics of sound to make the landscape itself their alarm system, giving them precious minutes to shut down their operation and melt back into the woods, long before the intruders ever laid eyes on the still.